Perfume doesn't just disappear, Daniel. I stood at my vanity with the bottle in my hand, staring at the liquid line as if it had personally insulted me. 3 days earlier, my favorite perfume had been nearly full. Now almost half of it was gone. Daniel barely looked up from his laptop. Georgia, maybe you've been using more than you think. I've worn it once this week. He gave a small laugh. Then maybe expensive perfume evaporates faster. The answer was ridiculous, but the way he said it made me feel ridiculous for asking. I slowly set the bottle down. Was anyone here today? His fingers stopped over the keyboard. Only for a second. Then he looked at me. No, why would anyone be here? Too fast. Too defensive. And suddenly, the missing perfume didn't feel like a small mystery anymore. I smiled as though I believed him. Just asking. What Daniel didn't know was that I had already started paying attention. My name is Georgia Carter. I'm 32, and until that week, I had never searched my husband's phone, checked his location, or questioned who entered our home while I was gone. Daniel worked remotely as an IT consultant, which meant he spent far more time in the house than I did. My branding job regularly pulled me into client meetings across the city, sometimes keeping me away until evening. I trusted him with that freedom. Completely. That was why the perfume bothered me. It wasn't cheap, and I didn't wear it every day. It had been Daniel's anniversary gift to me, actually. A warm floral fragrance he once said he could recognize before I even walked into a room. The first time I noticed the level dropping, I blamed myself. Maybe I had sprayed too much before a dinner. Then it happened again. And again. Nothing else on my vanity moved. My foundation lasted normally. My expensive moisturizer stayed untouched. My lipstick remained exactly where I left it. Only the perfume kept disappearing. One Thursday afternoon, I came home unexpectedly between meetings. Daniel was downstairs on a conference call. I went upstairs to change shoes, reached for the perfume bottle and stopped. The metal nozzle felt slightly warm beneath my fingertip. I stared at it. Someone had used it recently. I walked downstairs. Daniel. He muted his laptop. Yeah. Did anybody stop by? His face barely changed. No. I held his gaze. Not even for a few minutes. No, Georgia, nobody. I nodded and walked away before he could ask why. That night, after Daniel fell asleep, I took the perfume into the bathroom. Using the edge of a tiny transparent sticker, I marked the exact liquid level where nobody would notice. Then I returned the bottle to the vanity. The next morning, I left for work without touching it. When I came home that evening, Daniel was cooking pasta in the kitchen. Good day, he called. Busy. I went straight upstairs. The bedroom looked untouched. The bed was made. The curtains were closed. The perfume bottle stood exactly where I had left it. For one hopeful second, I almost laughed at myself. Then I picked it up. The liquid had dropped below my mark. My stomach tightened. Someone had definitely used my perfume while I was gone. And Daniel had just looked me in the eyes and told me nobody had been inside our house. I placed the bottle back carefully, exactly where I found it. Then I stared at my reflection in the mirror and whispered, if someone keeps touching what's mine, I'm going to find out who. The next morning, I stopped trying to explain the perfume away. I started watching the house. Not Daniel. The house. At first, the changes were so small I almost felt foolish noticing them. The decorative pillow on the living room sofa was turned backward. A coffee mug sat in the dishwasher, even though Daniel had told me he'd been drinking from his travel cup all day. Then, while folding the throw blanket from the couch, I caught a faint scent that wasn't mine. Floral shampoo. Sweet, powdery. Definitely unfamiliar. That evening, Daniel was sitting at the kitchen island when I asked, Did you change laundry detergent? He looked up. No. This blanket smells different. He shrugged. Maybe from the cleaners. The blanket hasn't been to the cleaners. His jaw tightened. Georgia, what exactly are you trying to say? Nothing. Because lately, you've been acting like I'm hiding something. I stared at him. He had turned my question into an accusation against me. I asked about a smell, and I answered. He pushed back from the island. I have enough stress with work. I don't need to come home to an interrogation. Come home. The words almost made me laugh. He worked from home, but I didn't challenge him. Okay. That seemed to satisfy him. Over the next few days, another pattern emerged. Whenever I mentioned coming home early, Daniel suddenly had a reason I shouldn't. I've got a confidential client call at 3. The house might be noisy. I'm testing some equipment. You'll probably be more comfortable staying at the office. Each excuse sounded reasonable by itself. Together, they didn't. Then I found the hair. It was wrapped around the base of my perfume bottle. Long. Blonde. Mine was dark and stopped at my shoulders. I carried it downstairs between 2 fingers. Daniel. He was typing on his laptop. What? I held it up. Whose is this? He squinted. A hair. A blonde hair, wrapped around my perfume. He laughed once. Not naturally. Probably from dry cleaning. I didn't answer. He looked back at the screen. You're seriously overthinking this. Maybe I was. Or maybe he was counting on me believing that. The next day, I bought a small motion-activated camera disguised as a digital clock. I placed it on the dresser, facing the vanity. That night, Daniel walked past it twice and never noticed. The following morning, I kissed him goodbye. Big meeting, he asked. All afternoon. He smiled. Good luck. Thanks. I drove away. An hour later, I was sitting in a client conference room, trying to focus on a presentation when my phone vibrated against my notebook. Motion detected. My hand went cold. I waited until the meeting ended, hurried to my car, and opened the camera feed. For several seconds, the bedroom was empty. Then the door opened. Someone stepped inside. A woman. She walked straight toward my vanity. And without hesitating for even a second, she reached for my perfume. I couldn't breathe. Inside my parked car, I turned the volume all the way up and watched the recording continue. The woman set 2 shopping bags on the bed, as if she had done it dozens of times before. Daniel appeared behind her. He wrapped an arm around her waist. She smiled, leaned into him, and kissed him. Not awkwardly. Comfortably. This wasn't a secret meeting between nervous strangers. This was routine. She slipped off her shoes, walked across my bedroom, and opened my closet. My sweater looks cute on you, Daniel said with a grin. She laughed. Are you sure she won't notice? Georgia barely wears that one anymore. My stomach dropped. She pulled one of my cream-colored cardigans from the hanger, slipped it over her shoulders, and admired herself in my mirror. Then she sat at my vanity. Without asking. Without hesitation. She picked up my perfume. Your favorite, she teased. Daniel smiled. No, hers. She sprayed it once on each wrist, then twice around her neck. I love this scent, she said. You should wear it more often. I already do, she joked. The 2 of them laughed. I stared at my phone, unable to believe what I was hearing. She wasn't stealing my perfume. She had become comfortable enough to think it belonged to her too. Instead of driving home, I forced myself to stay where I was. If I confronted them now, all I would have was one video. One denial from Daniel could turn everything into an argument about trust. I needed facts, not suspicions. Over the next week, I gathered them. Each day the camera captured something new. The woman arrived while I was supposedly at meetings. She greeted Daniel with a hug before the front door even closed. She cooked lunch in my kitchen. She curled up with him on my couch. She wore my robe after showering. One afternoon, she even stood in front of my bedroom mirror, taking selfies while wearing my perfume and one of my scarves. Each recording confirmed the same thing. She behaved like a woman who believed she belonged in my house. I quietly copied every video onto an encrypted drive. Then I made an appointment with a divorce attorney. Ms. Ramirez watched several clips without interrupting. Finally, she folded her hands. "You've done the hardest part already." I wish I hadn't. She nodded sympathetically. "I understand, but don't confront him yet." "I don't. Not until we've organized your financial records, secured copies of important documents, and preserved every piece of evidence. If he realizes you've discovered the affair, he could start hiding assets or deleting evidence. So I pretend everything is normal. For a little longer." Walking out of her office felt surreal. My marriage was ending. Daniel just didn't know it yet. That Saturday, our neighborhood hosted its annual barbecue. Nearly everyone came. Daniel insisted we attend. "You've been working too much," he said cheerfully. "It'll be good to relax." I almost laughed. Relax. At the barbecue, Daniel shook hands, flipped burgers, and joked with neighbors like he was the model husband. One of our neighbors smiled at us. "You two always seem so solid." Daniel wrapped an arm around my shoulder. "We've got a boring marriage," he joked. "Nothing exciting ever happens." Everyone laughed. I forced myself to smile. If only they knew that another woman had been wearing my clothes inside my home 3 days earlier. By the time we returned home that evening, my decision was made. I walked into the bedroom while Daniel showered downstairs after grilling. I picked up the perfume bottle. From my purse, I removed a small bottle of cosmetic-grade blue skin tint I had purchased that afternoon. The instructions were simple. Nearly invisible inside clear liquid. Harmless to skin. But once exposed to body heat for several minutes, it gradually developed into bright blue stains that were extremely difficult to wash off immediately. I carefully measured the amount. Mixed it thoroughly. Closed the bottle. Placed it exactly where it belonged. Then I stepped back. Everything looked untouched. When Daniel came upstairs, he noticed nothing. Neither would she. I switched off the bedroom light and quietly whispered to myself, "Let's see who wears my scent next." 2 mornings later, I picked up the perfume bottle before leaving for work. The liquid level had dropped again. She had been back. I didn't need to guess anymore. A notification lit up my phone almost immediately after I arrived downtown. Motion detected. I opened the live feed. There she was. She walked into my bedroom like she owned it, tossed her handbag onto my bed, and greeted Daniel with a kiss. He smiled as if nothing in the world could touch them. She stood in front of my vanity, lifted my perfume, and sprayed it generously across her neck, wrists, and blouse. Daniel chuckled. "You really like that perfume." "It makes me feel expensive," she replied. Neither of them had any idea what was about to happen. Instead of confronting them, I quietly left my office and followed from a distance after they drove away. They arrived at an upscale restaurant across town. It wasn't a hidden cafe. It wasn't somewhere anonymous. It was one of the busiest places in the city. Through the front windows, I watched them join a table of 8 people. Several faces looked familiar. A few were from Daniel's professional networking group. One was a former coworker of mine. I stayed outside long enough to see everyone settle into conversation before walking inside and requesting a table with a clear view of theirs. About 15 minutes passed. The waitress delivered appetizers. Everyone laughed at something Daniel said. Then I noticed it. A faint blue mark appeared just below the woman's left ear. She rubbed at it absent-mindedly. "It won't come off," she muttered. Daniel barely looked up. "Probably makeup." Another guest frowned. "I don't think that's makeup." Within another few minutes, blue patches appeared along both wrists where she had sprayed the perfume. Then the collar of her white blouse slowly darkened with streaks of blue. Conversations around the table began to fade. People stared openly now. One woman leaned forward. "Did you spill ink on yourself?" I don't know." The woman hurried toward the restroom, clutching her neck. Daniel followed immediately. I waited. 5 minutes later, she emerged looking even worse. Trying to scrub the stains had only spread them farther across her skin. Whispers filled the restaurant. Daniel looked pale. His confidence had disappeared. That was when I stood. Folder in hand, I walked toward their table. A former coworker blinked in surprise. "Georgia." Daniel turned. For a split second, relief crossed his face. Then he saw the folder. His expression collapsed. I laid several printed photographs onto the center of the table. The first showed the woman standing in my bedroom, wearing my cardigan. The second showed her sitting at my vanity with my perfume in her hand. The third showed Daniel kissing her beside my closet. Silence settled over the table. Nobody reached for their food. Nobody spoke. The woman looked from the photographs to me, then back to Daniel. "What is this?" I answered before he could. "Those were taken inside my home." Daniel finally found his voice. "Georgia, please." "No," I said calmly. "You've had months to talk." Several people around the table shifted uncomfortably. One man quietly pushed his chair back. Another lowered his eyes to the photographs. Every excuse Daniel might have offered died before it reached his mouth. He reached toward me. "Can we do this somewhere private?" I took one step backward. "No." Before another word could be spoken, a familiar voice cut through the silence. "Daniel." Everyone turned. His older sister had just walked into the restaurant after arriving late. She looked from the blue-stained woman to the photographs scattered across the table, then directly at her brother. "Daniel." She frowned. "Who exactly is this woman?" Daniel's face drained of color. For a long moment, nobody answered his sister's question. The restaurant, which had been filled with conversations only minutes earlier, had gone strangely quiet around our table. His sister looked at me first, then at the woman, whose neck and wrists were now stained an unmistakable shade of blue. Finally, she looked back at Daniel. "I'm waiting," she said firmly. Daniel swallowed. "It's complicated." "No," I replied. "It's actually very simple." I opened the folder again and spread the remaining photographs across the table in chronological order. This one was taken 2 weeks ago. I pointed to another. This one was 4 days later. Then another. And this one was yesterday. The timestamps were visible on every image. Each photograph showed the same thing. The same bedroom. The same house. The same woman. The same lies. Daniel rubbed both hands across his face. "Georgia, I can explain." "You should." The woman stared at him. "You told me you were separated." He froze. "You said she barely lived here." His silence answered for him. She slowly turned toward me. "You still live in the house." "I never moved out." Her expression shifted from embarrassment to disbelief. "You told me the divorce paperwork was almost finished." Daniel opened his mouth. Nothing came out. She looked down at the photographs again, recognizing my furniture, my vanity, my clothes. "You let me wear her things." He still couldn't answer. "You let me spray her perfume." The realization hit her all at once. She hadn't just been part of an affair. She had been manipulated into believing she was entering an empty marriage. Without another word, she removed the cardigan she was wearing, folded it onto the table, picked up her handbag, and looked directly at Daniel. "Don't ever contact me again." She walked out of the restaurant without looking back. Daniel started after her. She raised one hand. "Don't." He stopped. For the first time since I had met him, he looked completely powerless. His sister slowly sat down. "I can't defend this." "You don't have to," I replied quietly. "I had no idea." "I know." She looked at her brother with visible disappointment. "You've embarrassed yourself, but worse than that, you've destroyed your marriage." Daniel finally looked at me. "I'm sorry." I met his eyes. "No." His shoulders slumped. "You don't get to summarize months of lies with 2 words." He lowered his head. "You didn't make one bad decision." I spoke calmly enough that everyone at the table heard every word. "You invited another woman into our home. You opened my closet. You let her wear my clothes. You watched her use my makeup. You handed her the perfume you bought for me. And every time I asked you what was happening, you looked me in the eyes and lied." He wiped at his face. "I never wanted to hurt you, but you kept choosing actions that did exactly that." He had nothing left to say. The evidence spoke louder than either of us ever could. Over the following weeks, everything happened exactly as my attorney had advised. Because I had quietly preserved every recording, photograph, financial statement, and timeline before confronting Daniel, the divorce moved efficiently. There were no arguments about what had happened. There was no room to rewrite history. Daniel eventually moved into a small apartment across town. Several mutual friends distanced themselves from him after learning how long the deception had lasted. His professional reputation also suffered within his networking circle, not because I publicly attacked him, but because the truth had unfolded in front of people he respected. Rumors weren't necessary. They had witnessed enough themselves. I stayed in the house. For the first few weeks, every room reminded me of what had happened. Then I realized something. I wasn't the one who had violated that home. I wasn't the one who had filled it with lies. So instead of leaving, I changed it. I repainted the bedroom. I replaced the furniture around the vanity. I donated the old bedding. Little by little, the house stopped feeling like the place where my marriage ended. It became the place where I started over. A few months later, I walked into the same boutique where Daniel had once bought that perfume for me. The sales associate smiled. "Would you like to try this fragrance again?" I looked at the bottle for a moment. Months earlier, I would have walked away. Instead, I smiled. Yes, I bought a new bottle. Not because it reminded me of Daniel. Because it reminded me of the day I stopped doubting my own instincts. That evening, before meeting friends for dinner, I sprayed it lightly onto my wrists. The scent no longer carried betrayal. It carried certainty. Sometimes people think the biggest loss in a broken marriage is the relationship itself. For me, the biggest loss would have been ignoring the truth after it was standing right in front of me. I lost a husband who chose deception. But I found something far more valuable: the confidence to trust myself again.